Welcome to the Mitchell Gallery's exhibition of Photo Brut, the collection of Bruno Ducharme. And I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists who've taken a lot of time to prepare for this discussion, and many people to thank. First of all, John Verdi, thank you for being the spearhead in this and inspiring this inspiration. John's a tutor here at St. John's College. And Rebecca Hofberger, the director of the American Visionary Art Museum and a collector, curator, and overall good gal. Highly honored. Thank you for taking the time to discuss this with us. Jennifer Donnelly, who's a St. John's College alum and a cultural historian, who's coming to us from Switzerland. Thank you for staying up to do this. There are many people actually to thank, first of all, to Bruno Ducharme for allowing us to have this exhibition online. It was an exhibition in part at the American Folk Art Museum in New York City, and he has very generously agreed to let us borrow part of this collection for the exhibition. I also want to thank his assistant, Nicholas Bataille, who's really been the nuts and bolts on that end on getting images to us. So thank you very much, Nicholas. And of course, our Mitchell Gallery Board, the Arts Councils for Maryland State Arts Council and Anne Arundel County Arts Councils, as well as our individual sponsors of Mark and Lori Saladin and Cynthia Alderdice, and the huge support of PNC Bank, which we'd like to thank Will Backstrom for guiding us through that. So to get really to the nitty gritty of this, why is this art so powerful? And I think that was one of our opening questions. And maybe you would like to start with some of that. I can share my screen and start with our current slide here. So with Mr. Ducharme, and starting with Marcel Bascallard.
So these Bascallard, just a brief history of of his life. He lived in a small town in France, and I guess if there was a critical moment in his life, it was when his father murdered his mother when he was a teenager. He also drew scenes from his town, which he would sell to tourists who were visiting. But at some point, he gave that up and began to design and make women's clothing for himself, which he would only wear when he went out with the intention of being photographed. And so what we have from him are many photographs throughout his life, always dressed as a woman. And these are some of them. We have a number of them in the show, but maybe we could just talk about these two, the group here, talk about what makes them interesting, if they are. I find them both fascinating. I'll just point out one thing. In most of the images, although maybe not all of them, it looks like he's holding in his right hand a mirror. Maybe it's not a mirror, but some of the photos suggest that it is, because one can see reflections. I have no idea why he's doing that. His positioning is always almost the same. And I'll just say for myself, I'm very attracted to his, I'll call it his smile. Maybe it's not a smile, but that just is, his face too just kind of moves me and draws me in. But that's only part of what I'm seeing.
Do you think it's his attitude that draws you in, or is it just because it's the man who makes clothing?
If by his attitude, his attitude also is his physical position. I think that's part of it. And I don't know, I've tried in looking at the pictures that we have to characterize him? That is he aggressive? No, not really. Is he somehow confident? Exuding an air of confidence? I'm not sure. So that's what I'd like to hear what people think about it.
What struck me is that I think from the first picture of the man who collected it, Bruno Ducharme, that he looks a lot like Bruno Ducharme when I looked at this. That was my first thought, that he perhaps saw himself a little bit in this. And, the cross-dressing of men goes back in centuries in recorded history. It's not something kind of new and hip in any way today, or as in the Far East with entertainers, or even when geishas were always men. The official portrait of one of the colonial governors of New York, who was a man, insisted that he be painted in full dress, woman's dress regalia. So I think there's something timeless about this urge and I understand that Marcel Bascallard was actually very threatened by authorities for doing this. It was not easy. So it was a big compulsion.
Somebody just wrote in and said, the smile is, sort of like Mona Lisa. And that's an interesting comment, I think, because it's sort of ambiguous. And I hadn't thought about Bascallard sort of resembling Ducharme, and now that you say that, maybe we'll go back. Maybe we can go back to that. Let's see here.
Just saying hello.
Well, we'll see what he has to say about that. We have 2 other images by him as well. Let me move our screen over here a little bit so you can see that.
Yeah, these are more complex. That is, it's the one on the left obviously is 2. You can just barely, if you look right in the center between the 2 bodies, you can see a kind of shadowy overlap or transparency. How he did that, and why he thought to do that, why the one image has the hat, and then the one on the right too is a multiple exposure. So he's I think he's obviously he's thinking, he's really working at this as pieces of art. When he was asked why does he dress in women's clothing, which I think, as I said, he only dressed in women's clothing when he planned to be photographed. He said, because women's clothing is just more aesthetic, it's more beautiful. And if I'm creating a work of art, that's the clothing I want to wear. At least that's what he said. But it is true, he was arrested by the Nazis a couple of times because he was a cross-dresser. He wore women's clothing in public. He'd walk around town and get someone to take these. So that's another question. He is not taking these photos. So in one sense, he's not the maker of the photos, although he's certainly the constructor of the scene and the costume. But someone else takes the actual photos.
Do you notice how he always is sort of framed, by shrubbery? He seems to sort of emerge. To me, it has sort of a grotto effect. This piece and the prior. I don't know if there's something. If I'm reading more into this than what it is being sort of symbolic. Maybe
I think this is one of the challenges when we deal with art brut or photo brut. There is no tradition that these makers are coming out of. And so if this were a traditional piece of art made within the canon, we would be able to ascribe each detail in the picture to some allegory or attribute. And here we can't. And this is something that makes all of these images in this exhibition so enigmatic, is that they defy the usual codes and languages that we have to speak about images. but they're there in front of us and they speak to us, but they're not using the same language that other images from the art historical canon do, right? So what you're saying, Lucinda, about the grotto, it absolutely might be there. Did Bascallard intend this? We don't know. If he did intend it, did he intend it in the way that if he were, a product of the academy, that his teacher would have intended him to have it used? We don't know. We're suddenly thrown into this, language-less sort of, house of cards where everything is a little bit topsy-turvy, and certain things in so many of these images in the exhibition, Bascallard, but so many of the other people who've made these images, there are things that resemble certain things from trained artists, from gallery represented artists, from artists in history books, from artists who are taught in universities. And yet, since these artists were not working side by side or studying the tradition or emulating them, we have to ask ourselves, should we judge these pictures in the same way, or should we apprehend them in the same way?
So Jennifer, let me just ask, because I think what you're saying is right. Are you suggesting that we can just focus on these pictures, that Bascallard is requiring that we develop a vocabulary to talk about his work? That
sounds like a subject for a new book for you, but
no, but seriously, that we develop that the pictures require us, they require us to interact with them as all art would, but without the advantage of having a pre-existing vocabulary. That is, and by vocabulary, I mean a kind of background of meaning that we could go to and say, oh, look, he's doing this, or he's moving away from so-and-so, or he's solved this problem. But the pictures themselves, I'm just wondering if you're thinking that we are.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say to everything you said, I would say yes, except with one caveat. I would say the images are asking us to do all that. Is the maker, is Marcel Bascallard asking us to do that? I'm not sure. I don't know. Like you, I don't know what this mirror is about. I don't know what this smile is about. It's a mystery. He is either deliberately or unintentionally, created this completely unenterable world. But the images absolutely do, I think, what you're saying to do. They make us, they force us, they invite us. It doesn't need to be so violent. It's an attractive, desirable place to go to investigate these mysteries and explore.
I used to live in France, and particularly in the countryside all throughout Europe. You will see, and remember this was back in wartime, you will see images of the Virgin and other saints in country settings,
Absolutely.
often framed by nature like that.
Yeah.
And I think, Lucinda, you were very right to kind of notice that, first off, it's aesthetically pleasing to have that kind of, crown around you of nature and to be the centerpiece of it. But it's also, you're talking about vocabulary as if the only way people get vocabulary when it comes to art is through a formal schooling, whereas lay people all the time are given imagery through advertising and going back then through the church. And I think that he's framed himself in as lovely a way as possible. I don't know the colors to the right in the black and white, but in the color piece, just even the blue silks, so often you see Mary in a blue robe, etc. It's a contemporary part. I don't know, we won't know, but those are the thoughts.
And just to throw in, this is a wild herring here, but this is the first time I noticed a little cat down in the corner. This is the first time I've noticed this. And the cat is looking straight out, kind of mimicking him. And I can't determine whether the cat's got on an outfit or if it's just a white back, but I think he's actually dressed the cat up, because you see the way the leg. I've just noticed this. I've looked at these images now for a few months. So I find that really kind of interesting, like who's being viewed, are we being viewed by the artist or are we viewing the artist?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I hadn't noticed the cat either, but he's staring directly into the camera,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
There's a sort of, I don't want to say it's challenging, maybe it's more inviting, but it's a kind of combination of challenge and invitation. Look
mhm,
at me. What do you think of me?
mhm.
But he's also wearing necklaces
Mhm.
in these cases.
And without sounding, this is not mean at all, but I mean, he's got nice legs, so, he wears them well, so it's, it's not completely contrived, he wears it well. And it's a very different narrative, I think, than what, Lee Godey or Mark Hogan camp, they have a different, narrative, entirely. Maybe we want to move on to talk about, Lee Godey, because it's portraiture again. And
Go through all of hers and then come back to this one
okay,
that we.
okay. Is there one you'd like to start with to
We'll just
discuss?
go back. You can go back to the first one.
Okay, all right.
But just background, these photos she took, if I can put it that way, in one of those photo booths in a Greyhound bus terminal in Chicago. So she doesn't touch a camera. She doesn't have a camera. She doesn't handle film or anything. She gets into the photo booth and the photo booth does the rest. Then in this one, she touches it up with some color, but it's not clear exactly what she's doing unless her dress is a kind of performance that then gets recorded by this. But she's not, in a funny way, she's not a photographer because she doesn't deal with a camera
Hmm.
at all.
Well, yeah, am I interrupting, John?
No, go on.
Yeah, and I think going from Bascallard to Godey is very interesting because these are both people who took photograph or had photographs made of themselves and also did drawings, extensive drawings, right? I mean, in some of the pictures that we just saw, we see that Lee Godey or Godet or she had many names, right? But she was an almost obsessive kind of maniacal illustrator. She nonstop was drawing things and selling them to people, and we have no idea how many of these things were made because she just kind of like threw them away like they were a napkin or something like that. And yet we have these images of her, like the one that we're looking at right now, of her face and her performing something or communicating something with some smile. We don't know what it is, but we also have her graphic work that she made with her own hands. And it's the same with Bascallard. And he also was not, he didn't have a selfie stick back then. He had someone else making the photograph of him. So in terms of, whether he was involved in the mechanics of the production or not, he wasn't, just like she was. And, both of them, they're separated by quite a bit of time in terms of what they're doing, but there are certain parallels, right? Also in their lifestyles, they both didn't live in fixed houses all the time. They didn't stay with their families. Anyway, so they both ask in similar ways the questions of how are we to read their works? How can we apprehend their works? Does it matter? Does their background matter or not? Does to understand her picture of herself here that was taken in a photographic terminal of a Greyhound bus station, does it matter? Do we need to also know that she was drawing? And then we can also think about her drawings were on the more primitive, naive side in art historical terms, whereas Bascallard's, we don't have his images in the show, but we know that the drawings that he made, they were like a draftsman. I mean, they were like an engineer's drawings of an airplane's interiors or something like that. They were so precise, they could have been made by a computer. Does that color how we should read his pictures his photographs that he had made of himself or not? These are interesting questions, right?
Yeah. And in a way, I think both, so far, both Bascallard and Godey are at, to my mind, both of them are asking us, who am I? Do you know who I am? That's one way of thinking, but her facial expression is so different from his. Hers is not so inviting, maybe more confident, more challenging. And when she colors this picture in red, that has to be, that's her. The picture itself might have been a color picture, but it wasn't a red background. But yeah, but what Jennifer's saying, that's right, that she did many drawings outside of the Art Institute of Chicago. And if she liked you, she would show them to you and you could buy them from her. If she didn't like you, she'd tell you to go away. That was.
Rebecca, you were going to comment on something, I thought.
Well, for me, I just love the courage that people who, if you know, Ligodi had what we would call more of a normal life at one point, and she was a very beautiful woman. You can see in her bone structure, you can see kind of, and had children, a sense of that. And but in this new creation that each of them made, I find them saying, "This is me. I'm here." And that's very brave, because a lot of people have other lives, but it's in a secret way. And they lived performance art, Can I see more of the Godey work, or can we show more of that? Yeah. You can see, cleaned up. She looked like a Palm Beach matron in that one, if you think, yeah. And it's wonderful, the influence that she had, so fiercely creative, on the students at the Art Institute and the visitors, who would come. It's interesting. She was a beloved, incredibly well-known figure, and the role of, throughout time, you've had kind of these kinds of characters who spoke truth to power, right? Whether they, that because they were just enough outside, they said something to the rest of us. That's why there's this fascination, I think, with people who don't negotiate reality like most of us. And they are the brave reporters from the edge.
And that makes a lot of sense to me, and then the question is, what are they reporting?
I'll tell you what I think. Linda Barry, do you know Linda Barry, the great wise woman cartoonist and teacher? She said, "We don't create a fantasy world to escape reality. We create a fantasy world in order to stay." And I think that's true for Darger and everyone else we're going to see tonight.
So
She
maybe,
seems that,
yeah, go on.
do you think she has a sense of humor about this?
Of Lee herself?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I did not know her. We could ask our owner of our store at the museum. Ted did know her, and was a fixture in there, and it'd be interesting to see. But she's performing, even when the photo booth taken at the thing, she's doing the whole thing. And she has a great sense of self and what that's going to give.
So the picture on the right, well, the one on the left too, shows her with her eyes looking up. But the one on the right, she also describes the sweater that she's wearing, or at least the colors. Artist Lee, brown, white sweater. Why is she telling us that?
Well, how many folk art paintings are called "Girl in a Red Dress" or "Boy in a Blue," boy blue, or whatever? I don't think that that's outside of, because she had that fantasy of being a French impressionist, right? That was her shtick. So I think it's just, kind of in that vein. I like the one with the money.
Yeah. Why? Say why. I mean, I agree, but why do you like it, Rebecca?
I don't know. I mean, she's using props like any great actor to populate her visual imagery,
it's really compelling. I'm especially drawn to this because she's looking just straight out. There's no avoiding her eyes, and there's such a confidence there. How many people, I think about that when you want to take a photograph of somebody, they kind of pose themselves, but how many people, really look intently into the lens?
Mhm.
Mostly they look, out on the horizon or 3/4, but I mean, this is, really done with a direct commitment. And what's interesting though, is because of the eye movement, and then in the drawing, she has them to the side, but just, this is a fabulous drawing, kind of with the epaulets and, I guess it's a hat. And this minimal line is just really, it's fabulous. Like it can almost like a continuous line drawing in a way. But, she does have, a good sense of design, even aside from her playfulness or her acting, in front of the camera. She really does have the chops.
Yeah. It occurs to me too, when you're talking about how she stares at the camera, how the fact that there is no photographer there can make a difference. I mean,
Mhm.
photographers always influence just somehow the attitude of the people they're photographing. Takes a long time for a photographer to get someone to act, to be natural, if one can be. But she's by herself in this booth, and it's her in this waiting for the flash. So there's something revealing about that. And of course, at the end, she chooses this one. Not only is it taken, but she chooses it. There may have been many that she threw away, but she chose. And this too has some kind of prop. Maybe that's one of her drawings rolled up, and the one that's on the drawing itself looks like it's a tray of watercolors that you might buy in a department store or somewhere, an art store.
Mhm.
And she's pointing to it. So there's a lot. I'm still not entirely, the question always comes up, would you hang this on your wall? And I don't know if that's a question. Maybe that's the wrong question to ask of these people. Maybe the answer should be no. I don't know.
Well, it depends which wall.
Yeah, right.
And I think, I mean, some of these, I could live, I mean, with this drawing and the picture of her with a watercolor tin set, I could live with that, very easily. I'm not sure if I could have over my sofa her looking out directly at me, stumbling into the bedroom or the bathroom or the living room in the middle of the night. I'm not sure I could cope, with that direct vision. But what's interesting, I think, is that these artists, are playing with the camera. They're sort of actors. They're making a statement, and very different than from Hogan Camp, who doesn't film himself at all, does he?
No, he doesn't. No.
Let me move up our screen here a little bit.
Yeah. So the story, that just a little bit about his story. He always drew as a child. He was a good drawer, and precise, imaginative. And then he got married, but then he kind of hit on hard times, began drinking, and his wife left him. And he too liked to cross-dress, like Bascallard. And one evening in a bar, he mentioned this to someone. And when he left the bar, he was just brutally beaten by 5 young men, and they left him for dead. But he wasn't dead. Went into a coma. And when he came out, he had lost his desire for alcohol. His alcoholism was cured, and he lost his memory as well. And he couldn't draw anymore because he had a tremor because of the beating. So what he did was begin to work with 1/6 size models that he would buy. He would make clothing, he would build furniture, he would build structures, and they all centered around this town that he named Marwencol, which was a fictional Belgian town during World War II. And and he's still alive. He's only about 60 years old, lives in Kingston, New York, and he has a website. He still does this. And he takes photos. He has to get down very low. I mean, these things are small. He has to get down low to take these photos. So I guess the question, I mean, it's not exactly a question because it doesn't need to be answered. What is the work of art? Well, is it the setting up? Is it the creation of the images, the scene? Is it what he photographs, the photograph itself? Not sure that it's important. And Marwencol as a village gets taken down and set up differently, and there's an ongoing story of what's happening there. It all has to do with Nazis who come and try to destroy, take prisoners, violate people, and so in a sense, he even says he knows he's working out the night of his brutalization over and over again in different ways. Maybe we could look at some of his other images, but just keep in mind, these are less than 1 foot high dolls, basically. He buys dolls and then he modifies them and makes the clothing, makes all of the, say the mugs that you see here, everything that you see that seems to fit in, he's made himself, except the dolls he does buy, but works on them.
Could I bring up something that is troubling me a little bit in the discussion? I don't think that we need to go to, oh, would I have that in my living room? Do I like that? Is that something I would want around? Because, I don't think there's a museum that I've ever walked to or through, or a gallery where I'm just looking. I'm not like constantly doing that valuation. I'm just really trying to see what's happening. And as far as, is this a work of art? Oh my gosh, absolutely. What I like about Mark Hogenkamp's work is that it is unbelievably detailed and original. His work does not look like anybody else's work. So you might label, oh, that's art, and it looks like 2,000 other people's could make the same thing. And what I think is our fascination is that we're looking for something that we don't see every day. And certainly, the works that Bruno has collected falls in that camp. But look at the effort and how real it is for him. The single most common theme of visionary artists who build things are utopias. This is kind of a dystopia in a way. But no, I'm an admirer of Mark's work. And I don't need to judge it whether I would want to have it in my home or not. I just think it is a fascinating body of creation. And it doesn't look like any other artist's work or conception that I have seen.
Well, and I agree. I'm really fascinated with this work for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, repurposing, action figure dolls, G.I. Joes and Barbies and Disney characters, and then repurposing them and then making this intricate clothing. So, and then he's choreographing them. So there's multi levels to this artistry. In costuming, in the choreography of where they're all placed. And so there are those compositional elements, and then the technical side of it, making these benches, these bar tables, and even the man here with the cigarette, hanging out of his mouth, and this young woman Barbie, looking at it from the side is a very natural. He gives them very natural attitudes, as if you were going into a bar scene with a lot of soldiers, the chaos, the drinking, the barmaid, and the foam on the beer. And so there's so many levels of this, and then the photography aspects of it, with the light that comes in, to the side. So he's even considered these, more than, just photographs. But he's looking at this on, on kind of a multi level. I see we've got a couple of questions here. Maybe I'll ask what they are. Let's see. What do you think of the paintbrush in the lower right corner? Down here, I looked at that too. And
That shouldn't be there, should it?
yeah,
Right?
I don't think that's
mean,
ours to decide. I
Yeah.
think it's a more, he's a living artist, so that's something. Why did he include that? I think that's interesting.
Mhm,
I mean, that certainly gives away something about the scale,
mhm, mhm,
whether it was intentional or not. I don't know, but yes, but that
mhm.
does do that.
And even, with the dartboard in the back, I mean, the Oldsmobile, the curtains. Let's go to some of the other scenes. Books, a yearbook, I think is just really a watch. This is almost, if you were going to put it in art history terms, almost like a Dutch still life, and of course he would never define it that way, but so I'm speaking only from my personal point of view, but the temporality, of things.
Now, as a photograph, the focus is on the vodka bottle and the woman's
Mhm,
stocking, the torn stockings. Everything
Mhm.
else is, with the depth of field,
mhm,
it's blurred. It's there. It's arranged, obviously, in a certain way, but at least my eye goes towards that. I want to call it a body. I mean, a person who's
mhm,
sitting there with the bottle.
mhm, mhm. In the field, with the camouflage and the Nazi hats. And John, is what you addressed, depth of field here too, as if we're looking at a movie.
And the modification of each face to be so individualized. It's
Mhm,
it transcends dullness,
mhm, mhm. Uh,
Mm.
we were talking earlier, this one is so realistic that it hardly seems that these are dolls or action figures, with the attitude, he's holding up his buddy, they're in the mud. Um, I find this one particularly gripping.
The in the whole series, even the first one, where people seem to be at ease and enjoying themselves, I find a lot of tension in each one, and either anger that's obvious and present, as in the last one, or anger that's just below the surface. Maybe I'm making that up because, if you see enough of these, you kind of get a sense of what the situation is, what the context is. But even in this one, I don't know, the cheerfulness of the place is muted.
Mhm, mhm.
Partly because the men are in uniform. The men are almost as if they're ready to start shooting if they have to.
It seems to me that the women are smiling, but none of the men seem to be. Of the ones.
That's because Barbie smile and GI Joes don't. I mean, I think that's just
Yeah.
a whim of Mattel or whatever. But but just thinking of there's one more artist left that we had spoken about speaking about tonight. There's many more artists in the show,
Mhm,
but there's Leopold Strobel, and in a way he's much different from the other three artists that we've looked at because photography is part of his practice, but
mhm,
it's much less obvious, isn't it? Like when we see this picture here before us, it looks like it could be a drawing, pretty good one, right? Looks very similar to a lot of early 20th century modernist painting.
mhm,
Could be a pastel, and it's only when we start to dig into what's known about this person that we understand that he kind of meticulously collected images from circulars and local newspapers, and then he built from those printed photographs. He drew over them, and he had a process, and he came up eventually with these images, which don't look like photographs. They have a precision, which is photographic, but unlike some of the other things that we've seen, there is no obvious photograph in them. They just like the other images we've looked at so far tonight, there's all sorts of interesting dimensions and aspects that we could investigate about the image, about the person who made it, about the context in which it was made, about the process and the mechanics and the technique behind it. Right, and we could do that, and I suppose we will be doing that in the next few minutes. But since this image in some ways is so different from the other ones we've seen so far, we might ask ourselves at this point, is there anything that unifies these four makers or artists or creators that we've looked at so far? Is there any reason for them to be in an exhibition together other than the fact that Bruno Ducharme decided to collect them? Does it, this is not a question of, is this art, is this not art, what should we call it? It's more like, here we are, we're looking at this show. Why are we looking at all these things together? What's the thought? What's the thought behind it? What might we take away, or what are the things that we might be paying attention to globally that connect the things? And not to target Rebecca, but as the founder of such a massively successful and influential institution that has supported and shown and introduced audiences to so many people who have made such incredible bodies of work. I don't know, maybe you from this well of experience might say something about the people you've worked with, or the images, the resources that you've come across, and how you've decided to show things. And
well, those are huge questions, but
right, sorry. Yeah.
But going back, didn't you bring up that the very first piece that was like the entry of Aha for Bruno Ducharme and his collection was by this artist?
I believe it was, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to understand that was his point of entry, and I think it's because if most of us on this listing, were to draw a picture of a cathedral in a European town, we would never do it as if we were looking through something, this amorphous, dark, shadowy shape. And if you look deeper on this one, you can see that it's obscuring quite an intense drawing. It looks like it even has a hand to the right. It's like some sort of a figure which has almost been drawn over, etc., and obscured. So it's I think it's that kind of surprising secret, that we're looking for people who again have a vision that we don't, and it lets us understand more thoroughly the full spectrum of what it is to be a human being. I agree. There are two artists, of course, we know, Diane Arbus and Fran Leibowitz, who often took photographs of people with who don't negotiate the reality. I don't want to judge anyone as mental ill or any of those labels, but she said something beautiful that I agree with. She said of her own photography of that kind, documentation, she said, "My work comes out of my life. The people I photograph are not freaks or curiosities to me. I like people who dare." And I'll just share with people on the call tonight, when I was a little girl, the first person that I ever met that was my first visionary artist was this character who had been institutionalized for years, as were many deaf students and mixed race kids at state institutions at Rosewood. And he, the only name we knew about him was Bumblebee, because he couldn't speak. And he would just make these very, very loud sounds as he would cut the most intricate paper dolls out of paper. And I encountered him when I was 5, and he was known as harmless. And he would wear this big winter coat in the middle of a hot summer with big pockets so he could put his paper and scissors. And he'd hitchhike. And he'd indicate, like, to my father, like, what's your daughter's name? And I think he said Becky. And in seconds, you hear with this bumblebee sound, snip, 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 snip. And then when we got out of the car, he had this garland with dogs and horses and intricate shapes and my name interspersed in between. And it turns out the very conservative artist, Joe Shepard, had also knew Bumblebee, but for John Wooders, it was a huge breakthrough to his lifelong appreciation of people who, kind of dance on the edge and looking at them as something that help us understand ourselves.
Mm-hmm. That's a really a good quote too. And we've got some questions here, so and we've got a few minutes. I'd love to address those. Someone asked, referring to Hogan camp, he said the soldier carrying the wounded comrade who is shooting scenes looks like a scene right out of the movie Forrest Gump. And I hadn't, we can go back to that. Let's see. Oops. I've seen the movie. I don't remember that scene, but does that resonate with anyone else?
Not to answer for anyone else here, but I would say that probably, I'm guessing that none of us here have the encyclopedic knowledge of either Hogan Camp's work or Forrest Gump or any of the other massive amount of World War II images that are out there to really answer that question. So I would answer back to the person who posed the question: what would it mean to you if Hogan Camp had based this on Forrest Gump? And what would it mean to you if he hadn't? Like, what difference does it make? Like, if he based it on it, does that make it more interesting, or does it make it less? Does it make it more banal or something like that? How does that color how we read it?
That's a point, but going back to John's comment about when he revealed himself a little bit at a bar, and we have to remember what happened to a Matthew Shepard, who was crucified by people he didn't know at a bar just for being revealing or evidencing that he was a gay person. What I kind of like about this symbol is that a comrade is helping him when he's injured, and he's still strong enough to fight back. So that's what I get out of that, because maybe he wished somebody had helped him too. And eventually, of course, he ended up in a hospital, so he was helped. But I think it's more probably personal. I mean, war looks like this. We're watching, wait till spring comes in Ukraine. We see a lot of such scenes.
And someone else also asked that miniature pieces can be quite costly. What is Mr. Hogan Camp's means of support? Great question.
Yeah, he
don't
lives
know.
very modestly, in a small house, and but he does sell stuff. He sells works of art, if that's what these are. He's had a show. He has a website. He has a gallery up near Kingston that he has a gallery. He has co-authored a book, or actually, he probably didn't write it, but that we'll be looking at in our book club, Mark Hogan Camp's book. But I don't know. I mean, he's got lots and lots of friends. Lots of friends. He's at least from what I've seen on the videos I've seen of him, he's a gentle, soft-spoken, chain-smoking guy whose main interest is Marwincall, his fictional town, and taking pictures. And he knows, from what I can tell, from what he said, he knows these are not real. He knows that. But he loses himself in the town. He loses himself while he's taking photos. He does use a digital camera. now. He used to use film, but he does use a digital camera. He's adept at that. So in that sense, he has real technique, he has real skill like that. But he becomes part of that town, even though there is one character in the town that represents him. He doesn't photograph himself, but he does photograph the character. So I don't know. He doesn't seem to spend much money, although it is true that these. Oops. Oops, I don't know what that was, but excuse me, but yeah. So I don't know. I don't know exactly where he gets, but it's true that these, and I think right now he's working on models that are smaller. I don't know what the next scale down is, but even smaller than this 1/6 size. So it's a good question. Where does Mark Hogenkamp get his money? By the way, I will say that one photo of the soldier helping his comrade did get a title called "Saving the Captain," and it was put up for auction at Sotheby's. They were expecting it to get $10,000. So I don't know. I don't know if that's what how much of that he sells, but.
Well, the comment was, it was just an observation that in the movie, Gump was carrying a wounded and furious Lieutenant Dan who was shooting while being carried out of the battlefield. So that's an interesting observation. And there's something very universal about it too. Someone else asked, is there a theme, sort of a counterpoint or chaos, conversation and dialogue, between and among the works, referring to Hogenkamp. And I guess if you see the book, I don't know the movie.
Well, they're kind of all set up in his yard, aren't they? So
Right.
it's not discrete works. It's kind of like it's kind of like Hogenkamp world. It's Marwencol. It's like he's recreated this world, right? And then the photographs they're kind of a derivative product of the actual installation. That's how I would describe it. It's one huge installation with different parts, and then there's photographs, which he makes himself, right, of them. So
he does all of that. He makes the scenes, he takes the photographs, and there's narrative too. This is an ongoing story. Marwencol has events happening even now. And so the book goes through part of that, takes you through the story of Marwencol up to a point. And it's in a way, in a little way, it's like Henry Darger, who illustrated the Vivian Girls with watercolor. And Mark Hogenkamp is not just taking pictures, but there really is a story, and it's not always the case that the good guys win. But that's part of what he thinks his therapy is. He keeps working through this, and this has been now. Let's see, his injury was early 2000, so this is almost 20 years of this kind of work.
Another artist like this that we showed and really admire is Reynaldo Cooler, who created Rockaterrania, which was both in 3D things and exquisite drawings of a very, very complex civilization, which had uniforms and all sorts of things. I mean, the amount that you can get, that they infuse themselves in, if anybody ever met Gene Roddenberry and knew the genesis for Star Trek and stuff, it's interesting when people can birth an entire world, whether it's a Stan Lee or, we're looking at this person, and there's something similar is when you can disassociate enough that you can channel in something all, so wholly original. So what a privilege to see this, and we have to thank Bruno in France for sharing so generously, and the Folk Art Museum in New York. I'm sure Valerie Rousseau had a curator there, and a good friend had a hand in this.
Yeah, Valerie Rousseau. Yeah. Someone also said that they see a religious theme sort of expressed in all the work in one way or the other, and and that religious or spiritual visions inspire much art described as visionary or outsider. And that's an interesting observation. I think they all possess their own sort of spirituality that may not be in the conventional.
I'd like to say St. Francis said something that is so fabulous. He said, what we are looking for is what is looking. So I want to say kudos to Cynthia out there, because, you know, you said she's noticed that there was the church pew in the middle of the bar scene, and she's got the spidey sense. I love your comments so much.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really interesting. And, you know, the thing about it is like with Mark Hogan Camp and some of these that have a sort of ongoing narrative, I would say, you know, with Darger and some of the artists that you can see on our website, there's not going to be an ending. It's not like it's all going to have a conclusion and everything's going to wrap up tidily and everybody's going to live happily ever after, or there's going to be disaster, because it's constantly evolving. And, you know, it's the story that will never end.
And the one, I mean, if there is, I mean, in our show, what if there's one thing that unifies the works, is that all of the artists draw from either photographs or make photographs or images from photographs, graphic images that are easily reproduced, as opposed to paintings. And so they are, in that sense, embedded in the world in which photographs exist, all of them. And I think that's even, you know, Leopold Strobel took images and colored over them so that they come out looking like they're drawings, but they're actually images that, as Jennifer was saying, he cut out of magazines and church bulletins and other things like that. So they are in some ways, they are in our world deeply, because photography is deeply in our world, and that kind of reproducible image is in our world. And so that's their, doesn't exactly unify them as far as, I mean, I don't think they talk to one another. They don't look at other people's art for the most part, which again distinguishes them from what you might call mainstream artists. But they are all interested in images which are either given to them or they can make with a machine, because a camera is a machine, as well as other things, you know. Yeah, go on.
Well, I was gonna say, you know, I've thanked a lot of people, and I guess the one person that at least I haven't thanked publicly is Dubuffet, you know, but you know, the French artist who made a public recognition of the value, you know, of these works. And I'm sure there were private devotees, but to recognize that these people that had no traditional academic training, who live off the grid, who have mental disabilities or issues or living conditions, you know, some lived during World War II, were actually executed. I mean, they have these complex stories, you know, where most of them, their problems have problems, but through that, you know, they work through with these images. And so, you know, to thank, you know, Jean Dubuffet for bringing this, you know, in a public way, to continue, you know, the tradition. Now, Rebecca, as you have done, there are not many institutions that are dedicated totally to, you know, visionaries or art brut or outsider art, however you want to label it. And it's really refreshing. Can we briefly just go back to a question we were talking about before we started about art training? And there was sort of a discussion about whether art training expands the vision or detours the vision. And Rebecca, you were sort of commenting on that.
No, John asked a question, you know, if maybe I forget exactly, but, you know, we've been criticized from the purest of the art brut camp, you know, for showing sometimes people who may have had gone to some art classes in their lives or whatever. So I joke that, you know, if you've gone to you know, art school for 3 months, we don't consider you damaged goods, but almost, you know, and it really comes out jokingly, you know, we're really looking for people who are saying something deeply from themselves. That's the thing. And like, I love that we have the 36 embroideries by Esther Krenitz that were done only for her family. She was a seamstress. She constantly said, oh, I don't know if I can make images. You know, she was just trying her best because she wanted her family, because she had no photographs of her home in rural Poland, to document how happy they were before the Nazis came in, and then how she survived. And there's this sweetness with it, because she is doing this out of love for her family she lost and for the family that she made and gained. So I'm always looking for something that comes from that level of sincerity, and not an intellectualization of art making within, will this sell, will it go well in a gallery? I do love and agree with Jean de Buffet that the relief is looking at work that was made for, that gets to the heart of why human beings ever made art at all, that it fulfilled some deep, you know, why are there cave drawings all over the world? You know, you gotta eat, you know, that it doesn't help you live that way. You know, like there's something that art making satiates. And I think what a feast to be able to look at, you know, work by people who have not gone through training and learned what other people did, or schools of art. But I actually don't believe very much in how art history gets taught, because I'm fascinated by people like Messerschmitt. Maybe he had syphilis, who knows, he went insane. But if you look at Messerschmitt's, you can look them up, guys, you know, these marble drawings, and they're very classical. He was a great artist. And then later in his life, they became like grotesque. But even the brilliant Leonardo da Vinci, look up Leonardo da Vinci grotesque portraits. And he was fascinated with faces that you almost can't believe he would have ever seen in real life. And he portrayed them again and again and again. So he did the Mona Lisa, but he also did these amazing grotesque. And I think that people who think deeply always have been hungry to understand the full spectrum of what it is to be a human being, kind of glory, warts and all. And that it is endlessly fascinating. I loved when Ashley Montague took the story of the real life elephant man, who was very deformed and had been kind of abused in sideshow work, but was a very, very bright man. And he titled his book, The Elephant Man, A Study in Human Dignity. Made me love Ashley Montague just on that. So we really try to always honor the beauty of every soul's work that we show, even when it's a disgusting character, you know, like someone who maybe hated all women, you know, but we give enough of the background that we just give who that person is in their own words as much as possible. We don't judge. And, you know, it just, like, I did a show that was very compelling to the audience just a few years ago called Parenting, and art without a manual, the good, the bad, the horrific, and the sublime. And if people saw from their own experience of parents, whether they were semi-divine on earth or whether they were predators, you know, they saw the bits of their own story. And it was amazing to see visitors go through weeping and bridging conversations that they had never had with siblings, with grandchildren, etc. And that's what good art does. So I think tonight's group out there, I'm so glad everybody joined who has joined. And, you know, again, Jennifer, it's nice to be with you.
You too, Rebecca.
And you're near Lausanne, or you're in Lucerne?
Lucerne, closer to Lucerne.
Do you ever go to Lausanne to see Jean de Buffet's Art Brut Museum?
No, that's in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, or in the German-speaking part.
Oh, it's worth it. First off, my favorite restaurant's right there too. But Jean, yeah, Valley of the 20th Century is across the street. Maurice Béjar's company is still there. And yeah, I think Europeans have long had an openness. You know, if it's not just these people that we call, oh, they're the kind of fringe people. You know, if you look at the background of who the composer Hector Berlioz was, he took hallucinogens and wrote Symphonie Fantastique, you know, out of like no background in music. So I'm very interested in where people channel, how all of us get our best ideas. So I wanted to ask the audience out there, what if you had to list your favorite films, think of those three and see what is similar about them. What is it that is compelling? In the story? Is there kind of an outsider hero in the story that you relate to? And whether there was a bumblebee in your life, you know, where you were a kid and all of a sudden you see somebody who doesn't negotiate adult reality in the same way that most of the people you're meeting might. And what did that mean to you? Because I find creative people are awake to everything around them, you know, whether it be nature or whether it be people, whether it's temperature or light, smells, you know, all the senses. And the great thing that these kinds of, you know, outsider, if you want to call, I don't like the term, but visionary expressions, is that they give us entry to think deeper thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all. And Rebecca, we wish you well. I think you're stepping down from the American Visionary Art Museum on April 3rd. And gosh, it seems I can remember when very first time that was that your first exhibition was Wind in Your Hair, or
no, Tree of Life was
Tree of Life. And gosh, you know, it was quite a radical thing. So thank you for your generous contributions for art lovers and appreciators. And John, again, thank you for being the inspiration for this exhibition. And Jennifer, you really took the long road on this in participating at such a distance. We do have a couple of events that will be online. We have a lecture that John has that you can look at the exhibition with, and John will also be giving a lecture later in April. And then there is a book club. It's the Merwin Call. Actually, I have it here. I think you all can see it. Yes. It's an interesting read, and even the cover. I mean, you know, it looks like Tom Cruise or somebody. I mean, it's really, you know, it's really intriguing. So look on our website for our exhibition. We're strictly online due to construction on the Mellon building. So thank you very much. Be well, stay safe, and thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye-bye.